Hello friends, Angel Russell here. Some of you know me as Professor Sex, and I'm here with Tickle.life. This is Beyond the Basics, the sex ed workshop series where we break up myths and build up facts about desire. Today's show, sexual desire, arousal, and where the spark comes from in our relationships. In this new series, we've created workshops that will help you take the information you learn here and use it to grow and enhance the intimacy in your relationships. More about that later though. First, on with the show. To get to the heart of this matter, we need to start at the brain. Specifically, we want to look at how our brains process information in our environments to identify sexual cues. Environmental cues are things we perceive with our senses that give us information our body or brain respond to in a certain way. This could be physical things we touch, taste, smell. It could also be social, cultural, or behavioral things that make us think or feel a certain way. Those are all potential sources of environmental cues. A sexual cue is an environmental cue that our brain interprets as sexually relevant. This means it's something our brain interprets as being important to our sexual response cycle, or to our sexual arousal, or to our sexual attraction more broadly. Our brain is always scanning our environment for these cues. Researchers call this the dual control model of sexuality. These scientists have identified that we have two systems in our brains and bodies that take part in searching for sexual cues. The first system, our sexual inhibition system, or our SIS, identifies cues that are not sexually relevant. Researchers call these our not cues.
Ew, no!
Our second system, our sexual excitation system, or SES, identifies cues that are sexually relevant. Researchers call these our hot cues. Imagine you're in a room and everyone in the room is attractive, well-dressed, and friendly. There's coffee brewing in the corner, a stack of pastries and fresh fruit available. These are all pleasant things to consider, and there are some definite hot cues in this environment. Before you take a mental spin around the room and start handing out your phone number, imagine that same room is a really high-stakes job interview. All these attractive, well-dressed people are C-level executives, and you're about to give them a presentation that will determine whether you land a job you've been working towards your whole life. That's a lot of stress and pressure, and depending on how you're wired, you're starting to notice some not cues.
Huh? Jim?
It's not what it looks like.
This may not be the best time to hit on any of these very good-looking people. Researchers noticed that sometimes there are more not cues and sometimes there are more hot cues, and this balance is what drives the way we respond to things sexually. The point when one type of cue outweighs the other is what scientists call the sexual tipping point. Sexual desire refers to the way we as individuals process environmental cues as hot or not. This varies widely from person to person, and it can also vary widely throughout each person's lifetime. Desire can be thought of as responsive or spontaneous. Spontaneous desire is desire for sex that feels like it just appears out of the blue, spontaneously. We see this in a lot of movies and TV shows and songs. Waking up just feeling horny, or even seeing the slightest hint of something sexy and feeling turned on. These are examples of spontaneous desire. These folks may wish to have a lot of sex as often as they can. Sometimes it might even feel like too much sex when their desire feels a little out of their control. Responsive desire, on the other hand, is desire that emerges in a sexually erotic context. This is desire that's more context sensitive. Folks who prefer things to be just right before they're able to get their motor running. These folks may not wish to have sex as frequently as the spontaneous desire folks. When we see this in the media, there can be a lot of stigma that there's something wrong with folks who don't want as much sex as other people do. Sometimes it might even feel like no desire in a long-term context with a lot of not cues. Both are totally normal and healthy. We do tend to see that cisgender men and folks with a lot of testosterone in their system experience more spontaneous desire. And cisgender women and folks with less testosterone in their system experience more responsive desire. There's nothing inherently good or bad about either, and there's lots of variety all over the spectrum. These things just are. These processes are dependent both on what's happening in the moment and our life experiences leading up to that moment. How much we do or don't want sex is called sexual motivation. Bassen's model of sexual motivation explains the relationship between sexual desire and sexual arousal for both spontaneous and responsive desire folks. Spontaneous desire folks have an almost instant connection between identifying a sexual cue and experiencing sexual arousal. It's a straightforward process. Responsive desire folks, remember, are all about context. In our earlier example of the room full of hot people and yummy treats, the context that this was a job interview had an important impact on whether or not those cues were processed as sexually relevant or not. All right, let's talk about sexual arousal. So far, we've been talking mostly about sexual desire, or how your brain processes sexual cues. Sexual arousal refers to the processes that happen in your body based on the messages your brain sends regarding those cues. When there are more not cues than hot cues, typically your brain works to keep your body from responding sexually to any hot cues that might be present, because it can tell this just isn't the right time. When the hot cues outnumber the not cues, your brain says, it's go time, and sends signals to the rest of your body to respond to these sexual cues. Sexual arousal feels a little bit different for everybody, but generally it's body responses like your pupils dilating, your heart rate increasing, your senses feeling enhanced, blood flow to your genitals and other erogenous zones. We might feel tingling in our skin, butterflies in our stomachs, our entertainment centers get wet or hard. This excitement leads us to a desire to act, to touch or be touched, to experience something sexual alone or with someone else. Sometimes this process ends in orgasm, and sometimes the excitement levels off and fades. But that excitement is sexual arousal all the same and can be highly enjoyable in the right context. If they're not able to act on a feeling of sexual arousal, some folks can feel something known as sexual frustration.
You seem testy this morning.
Not testy.
Is it possible that you're sexually frustrated?
Okay, now I'm testy.
Keep in mind, a failure to act on feelings of arousal will not harm your body in any way, but it might mean that those feelings take a little longer to fade and leave your body. Your body might take longer to come down from that high than it would if you had acted on it. Once sexual desire becomes sexual arousal, the feelings can be intense and hard to ignore, but I promise nobody has ever died from a lack of sex. I know it feels like it, but it's not going to happen. Sexual frustration is annoying, and sometimes it can make us feel lonely or rejected, which are things we should take seriously. However, all of this is totally survivable, and it's not an excuse to act out inappropriately or violently. Sometimes these processes don't go exactly like this. Sometimes we notice cues that are sexually relevant, and our bodies just completely fail to respond. Desire, but no arousal. Or sometimes we're in a situation where sex is the last thing on our minds, but our bodies are responding anyway. A stimulus or environmental cue can be sexually relevant, but not sexually appealing. So arousal, but no desire. This disconnect is called arousal nonconcordance, and it happens to all of us. Ever got a boner for no reason at all?
Mr. Burgundy, you have a massive erection.
Really? Yes, I do. I'm sorry,
That's arousal nonconcordance. Ever wanted to have sex, but your body just won't cooperate?
Which is funny because in high school I failed biology, and tonight biology failed me.
That's arousal nonconcordance. It happens to all of us at different rates, but it's totally normal. All right, let's bring it all together. Hopefully, starting to understand these processes can give you some insight on what does or doesn't light your fire. A big key to applying this to your life is learning what's sexually relevant to you and how your body responds. Are you a microwave, hot and ready at the drop of a hat? Or are you a slow cooker? You need some time to warm up and the situation has to be just right. Do you fluctuate between these? Understanding your hot cues is important information, but it's also important to understand the kinds of things that can impact or interrupt these processes, or your not cues. Lots of things can be not cues, just like lots of things can be hot cues, and they can be different for everyone. But the usual suspects are things like medicine you take, food you eat, chronic pain or illness, trauma, or most commonly, stress. If you want to take a deeper dive into this stuff and learn practical ways to use this information to keep the fire burning in your loins and in your relationships, join me and the folks at Tickle.life for a workshop series that will help you do all this and more. To learn more and sign up, head to ProfessorSex.com or Tickle.life. Thanks for joining us.